My name is Dr. Markus Roggen. I'm a chemist and the founder of Complex Biotech Discovery Ventures, a research center in Vancouver, Canada. And you're listening to Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night?
Hello, listener, and welcome back to the Professionally Cannabis Podcast. I'm Johnny Weiser, and with me, as always, is my friend Oscar Houseman. Oscar, today's episode is an absolute cracker. Could you tell our listeners who it was with?
Yes, well, today's one is one of my favourites because it involves someone who I would consider a friend and colleague as well as a guest on the podcast. He's a very clever and funny man. Hailing from Germany, but now based in Canada, it's Dr. Markus Roggen, and I just find his approach to cannabis entirely refreshing. He's a no-nonsense scientist who came to the plant, well, we'll go into that in the interview, not for a love of it, and really his love of the scientific method shines through into everything he does. He also has a dryness of wit that particularly tickles me. So this episode, at least for me, was an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to sharing it with our listeners. So if that's enough of me hyping up my friend, I think we can let our listeners decide for themselves. So let's play the interview.
Where do they go, the smoke
Today, I'm very excited to say that we have on the podcast someone who I can call a personal friend and someone I've worked with, which is a first, I think, for us. But anyway, today we've got Dr. Markus Roggen, the founder of Complex Biotech Discovery Ventures, a private research institution based in Vancouver, Canada. He's of German extraction, as I'm sure you'll hear from his accent, but he made his mark in cannabis starting in California, working with a few different companies such as Outco before moving to Canada, where he worked with big names like MediPharm, and he's been the member of the board of scientific advisors for a whole host of different companies. So I'll just wrap up the intro there and say, Markus, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here on this podcast. Like you, I have a European background, so I'm happy to be on this European-focused podcast and can talk about our cannabis science.
So, Markus, as you'll know, as a listener of the podcast, as well as now a guest, our customary question is, what led you to the plant?
That's a long, funny story, I guess. My answer is always serendipity. I was in California for a postdoc, and I was in San Diego, which is the birthplace of triathlon. So I was actively competing in the races there. And my triathlon coach told me to stay around, to be in her training squad. And I told her, find me a job. And so she came up with a job in the cannabis industry. That brought me to cannabis. I had no background in cannabis beforehand. I had to learn a lot.
Well, that may have led you to the plant, but that's quite a short answer. So what made you stick with it all these years?
So when I started thinking about it, I realized I didn't know anything. I actually always thought you smoked the leaves. I thought it makes a lot of sense. That's the advertisement paraphernalia. That's all the symbols in the cannabis space is the leaf. In tobacco, you smoke the leaf. So I thought that makes sense. I was wrong. So I learned something. And there was a lot I didn't know. And there was a lot I could still learn. And that also holds true for the cannabis industry themselves. They don't know much about the cannabis plant and the cannabis products. And they still have to learn a lot. And so I thought it would be a good time to jump in and learn together.
And as a European person over on the other side of the pond being offered a job in cannabis a while back now, what were your initial thoughts?
My first thought was hell no. But my girlfriend at the time and now wife and my parents were like, well, if it's legal in California, why not?
And then you turned to it. And so what was that first job? Do you have anything that started from there that you still do? Or would younger Markus have a lot to learn from present day Markus on day one if you were to advise him about stepping into the cannabis industry?
I think my main advice would be think a bit more about your bosses, your employers, and the licensing status of that company you're joining. when licenses are in the process but not there, that doesn't mean the thing is legal yet. So there needed to be at some point a jumping of ship. So I started off setting up and building out a testing laboratory for cannabis, so an analytical lab. Well, the build out, you don't really need a license because you're just setting up a shell, like instruments, and building methods on reference standards. But then the license didn't come so that we could ever receive material from clients. And so it was then time to move on. But I still do cannabis analytics. We have changed, or I've changed focus a little. Instead of doing this scalable commodity of compliant cannabis testing so that the product is safe and can go out the door within the state regulations or country regulations. Now my analytics focus on how can we use them in production to optimize the process, to control the process, but also to hunt for unknown compounds that are not yet considered in the cannabis space, but might be important in the future.
Very interesting. So as your journey through cannabis has progressed, you started with perhaps, let's call it, quality assurance or safety standards, and now you're moving more into process refinement and even discovery. So are there any bits of research or scientific advancement that you're particularly proud of that you'd like to share with our audience? Perhaps not in too much detail, because I know that you're at a very high level of this, but for lots of our listeners, they're more on the business side.
Sure. So my explanation of cannabis science is always like a hockey stick. You start off easy, catch them, and then you just like totally drown them in scientific speak. So I think I made my mark with CO2 extraction optimization. I started in the industry late 2014. That was about the time that CO2 or supercritical CO2 extraction was introduced to the industry and started its utilization. And then my second job in the cannabis industry with Outco was focused on building and running their extraction and production operation. My colleague was a plant scientist. She handled all cultivation, and then I just got all the dead plants and made oils and vape cartridges out of it. And there I came to the industry and everyone said, CO2 is bad. It can't extract terpenes. It makes lower quality oils. Butane and ethanol extraction is so much better. And I was like, might be. I don't know how it should be, but I know how to optimize stuff. So in chemistry, there's a field called chemometrics that uses a lot of mathematical concepts, statistics, and computation to optimize systems. And for me, an extractor is just a system. And I then went with my team at it. We ran a lot of experiments, did a lot of computations, and figured out how to run this particular extractor at its best to make a vape oil. And that came at a time when California had this rule, clear is king. Like the clearest see-through cannabis oil is the best, because this came from the background of people using Rick Simpson oil, which is like the super black, dark tar thing, and it like looks disgusting already. And so they said, well, if you can highly refine the cannabis oil and it's like all distilled and it's like pure THC, that's the best. But I came to this from the outside and I was like, so you're saying that purified THC is great, but then you also say cannabis is so great because of the entourage effect, because of all the molecules that are in there. I was like, this doesn't really fit. You can't have a pure THC and then say all the other things are great. So my approach was, how do we optimize the extractor that it only extracts what you want and it doesn't need any further refinement thereafter? So we don't need to distill to clean up this black goop or diarrhea, how it normally looks when it comes out of a CO2 extractor. Yeah, I call it diarrhea. It smells like it looks like it feels like it. Anyway, so we can modulate the temperature and pressure to set a density of the CO2 fluid that then target extracts the compounds of interest, so terpenes and cannabinoids mainly. And they have different solubilities, as then chlorophyll and fats and waxes have different solubilities. So if you then combine the density of the liquid, of the supercritical fluid, with the time frame, then you can really target extract a cannabis product that is perfectly set for a vape cartridge, because it's high in terpenes, high in cannabinoids, low in fats, no chlorophyll, so that the color now looks a bit more like honey like a natural honey. So it's like yellowish, light brown, like amber, and it's not clear anymore. It's like there's a little bit of opaqueness to it. And I brought this to the market and I made the statement, like, you shouldn't go for pure, you should go for clean. And that was our approach. And I think I made an imprint in the California market and then across the different states. Now everyone does like full spectrum extracts in their vape cartridges. And I think, yeah, that might have come from my idea. And lately, being now up in Canada, we can do even more interesting research because now we are located on campus grounds of University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I hold a research position. My co-founder is a tenured professor, and we have access to a whole host of other professors. So we do collaborative research with them that are within our company or just purely academic. And actually today, as we're recording this podcast, our first publication went live between the company and UBC, where we're looking into the rates of decarboxylation for THC and CBD, and we use computational chemistry to explain the mechanism and rate differences. So that's where we can go really complicated, if you like, but I leave that to you.
And as a master of optimization, what innovations are next on your list? What have you got on your optimization bucket list to conquer in the near future?
Yeah, the thing that keeps me up at night is still CO2 extraction optimization, or actually general extraction optimization. When you look at the cannabis industry, they are extremely inefficient in their processes. They take long. They might not reach full yield. They might be inefficient in that they require extensive post-processing to make the desired product. And there are so many wasteful steps and aspects to extraction that we really can make a lot of gains there. And I see this from two sides. One, reducing the cost of production so that the profit margins are better. But secondly, to offer new products. We right now know of highly refined THC oil, so distillate. We know of purified CBD. And then there's this somewhat undefined whole spectrum extract for both cannabis and hemp. But beyond this, we don't really have much on offer. So on the product SKU side, we can also do a lot in extraction. And that is one of the major focuses of my research group right now.
So something that struck me as I heard that last answer and compare it to your first answer where you said you'd want to think more about what the bosses think. So you've transitioned from an employee to the boss. How has that transition been as an academic? It must be kind of a different thing to optimize for revenues and profits.
Yeah, definitely. As an academic, you really don't think about anything outside of your laboratory. So this is actually quite an interesting aspect of this work. It feels more real life because now I have to think, not can I do it, but can I do it at a profitable way? Or do I just go bankrupt trying to do this? So I have to now optimize for more aspects. Normally in an academic lab, I would optimize for yield or speed. Now I have to optimize for yield, speed, and cost. And then also usability, right? Because it's not just me who does the work. Also, other staffers in a company have to be able to do this. And it should be able to be done without suffering for 12 years in an academic institute and graduate with a PhD. Like, no one wants that. So that's the interesting side on our research side. But I now get to care for my colleagues, the company, and therefore my own future. So that is a secondary level of work. And I go with inspiration from my background as a researcher and as a sports person, because I don't have a formal education in business. But I think the more and more I learn about this, my ideas of how I run a company inspired by sport and academic research might actually be a good idea. and I'm happy to discuss them more in detail.
Yeah, would you be able to go a little bit more into that? Would love to understand from you how sport and cannabis intersect within your life and your business life.
Sure. So I guess the normal answer for sport and cannabis, people would say, well, ultra runners use cannabis to overcome the pain and go into the flow state. I ride bikes, and you shouldn't consume cannabis then. Okay, and I recently broke my shoulder mountain biking, so maybe you now should consume because of pain. Although, and that's misunderstood in the industry, sorry for the side tangent, cannabis is good for chronic pain, not for acute pain. And breaking a shoulder, I can tell you, is a lot of acute pain. Okay, enough of the side tangent. So, as a sport person, I'm goal focused because I compete. And there's the desired outcome you have with the company, which might be an IPO or a successful sale or just successful revenue at the end of the year. But to be a successful sports person, you have to be process orientated. So it isn't that you turn up for training every day and you do it every day. And you look at the day-to-day training, how to get the best out of it, how to optimize this. And the same goes for a company, in my mind, that I don't want to just stay in the clouds and have these grand dreams of world domination, because Canadian companies did that for the last few years and were initially quite successful at the public markets. But if you have looked lately, maybe these pie in the sky didn't really work out. So my approach is, how do I focus the team on the task at hand, and how do we ensure that our processes, the way we handle research, the way we approach our marketing processes, even like how do we store files so that we can find former research projects easily and don't have to redo work. I'm very process focused with the team, that we are able to work as efficiently as possible. Because I can't be a German, a chemist, and make my money in process optimization if I don't optimize my own company.
That makes sense to me. So something that, I want to ask based on your previous question, and I ask this because I know you personally, and I know that you don't consume cannabis, but were you tempted to take anything for medicinal value after your arm break? Not for acute pain treatment, because as you said, that's not really the right medicine, but to, for instance, help with the inflammation and the regrowth of sinews and structures.
So many people don't get that distinction. I have a doctor title, a PhD in chemistry, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medic. So I have no clue about the human body. So I refer to experts in that field. So if my doctor prescribes me a medication, I will take it. I will not go out on myself and try to find something that works. Because this eminence-based, or so former eminence-based in the medical field, or yourself, like you try this and then it works or it doesn't work, but you're just an example of one. And I prefer evidence-based, and the best thing we have right now are clinical trials. And it's not just that it works on me, but that it generally works, or that it works on a large group of people. And right now, there is very little on a fixed product. And the only product where we have that information is for Epidiolex and Sativex, the two products from GW Pharma, with two different indications. And neither of the indication fit my injury profile. So maybe I'm conservative or I'm cautious, but I didn't even take the paracetamol medication more than a day after I broke my shoulder.
Absolute warrior.
No, it's not a warrior. I guess mainly I'm really forgetful in these things, and I would just forget taking my tablets. And secondly, it helps with the symptom. Paracetamol helps with the pain, right? But it doesn't help with the regeneration of the broken bone.
And you mentioned just before the two products by GW Pharma. From your professional position and the work that you're doing, what products are you seeing that are, if not close to market, looking really promising, that could be the next in line following those GW products that you mentioned earlier?
I can give some general statements and considerations here. So GW Pharma approached cannabis from a pharma company, while most other products we see is a cannabis company trying to do pharma. And I'm not saying it can't be done, but the mindsets are very different. And cannabis generally, even medical cannabis, has approached this as, we know the plant is safe, so now let's see what it can do. While from a pharmaceutical approach, you're like, I need to know exactly what is in there. I need to understand every single compound. I need to know what it does. I need to know how it acts on the body. And I need to know, and I need to be sure that everything I put in is the same every time I put in. And secondly, it stays the same every time I do it. These last 2 points of I need to know what I put in and I need to know that it stays the same are grossly under-researched and grossly under-considered in the cannabis industry.
And you mentioned before there are sort of 2 key players at the moment, pharma companies that are trying to do cannabis and cannabis companies that are trying to do pharma. From your professional standpoint, what type of client do you prefer working with the most?
I actually don't have a preferred client. My preferred client would be who's willing to speak to me. Because we do have a standpoint, right? We do research and we do correct research. We don't cut corners, and our work takes a little longer and is a little bit more involved. So the willingness from partners and producers that are happy to work with us, that's already a big step. And we work for medical focused cannabis producers, so those would be outside of Canada and the US, and we have them on most continents, so Europe, the Pacific region, South America. But we also work with recreational producers, and there the focus is more, how do we keep costs down, how do we increase our yields, or how do we make a very consistent, high quality recreational product. So I don't really have a preferred client, but I want to see willingness to look at and follow the guidance of real scientific work. And if I can go on a tangent here, every second cannabis company in North America says inspired by science or driven by science, guided by science. And then I look at these companies, or sometimes I know them, and this is all marketing bullshit. Scientific process has a agreed upon definition, and none of them fit to it. The definition for science is it can be proven wrong, and I think not a single of those companies will say cannabis is not good or would accept that cannabis is not the cure-all. That annoys me a hell of a lot.
Talking about clients and people in the industry, I think I know, and I'm sure our listeners have got the sense by now, that you can be very straight talking and direct in your approach, and also come at it from a very rigorous scientific background. How do you find acquiring clients? Are people turned on by your very direct manner, or are they worried that you might find something that they don't want to see?
A friend of mine told me I get away with my approach to presentations because I'm German and I'm a chemist, so I was like, yeah, he can't do it any better. It's genetic. But I am direct, yes. I'm direct. I'm somewhat self-assured of certain points, but I'm also really questioning my own views on many others because I don't have the data to support it. And that is somewhat different to the generalized cannabis professional. And I do see a lot of pushback. Particularly, like, why should we work with you? You are expensive and we're already making money hands over fist. And I was like, yeah, you do, but you won't do it much longer because your processes are not scalable or they're not economically viable as soon as the prices go down. So when I founded the company and I moved to Canada in late 2018, which was at the height of the stock market, it was my assumption that the cannabis industry in Canada particularly, and to some extent in the US, is not based on strong fundamentals. Business fundamentals aside, that's not my expertise, but I saw that there are so bad fundamentals for cannabis production, for the scientific aspect of it, that it just had to break down. And I was somewhat banking on this market crash, that the earnings are not there, the margins aren't there, the market isn't there, the customer interest isn't there because of their bad processes or inefficient processes. And I like that the cannabis industry currently is hurting because they need help. And that's my business. I help them. So it gets better talking to the industry because they're coming around to my viewpoint.
Do you think your scientific background gives you more gravitas in those business conversations and those difficult conversations that you have sort of before working with a client than perhaps maybe a non-scientific backgrounded CEO might have in another situation?
I don't think I can directly answer this, but I maybe can explain it with an example. So when I got into the cannabis industry in 2014, I had a PhD in chemistry, and I knew all the other 5 PhDs in North America that were working in cannabis. So we were unicorns. But that means that most of the testing laboratories or most of the production floors were run by people that have maybe a lesser degree of education in chemistry or no formal education in chemistry at all. And I'm not saying that that is inherently a bad thing, but in a world where you can't really benchmark the expertise because everything is new, you have to fall back on some formal education and formal benchmarks. And now, basically every testing laboratory has a PhD chemist as the head of laboratory. You have now formally educated chemists and chemical engineers running the production floor of cannabis producers. I've now even seen scale-up chemists, which have an expertise that is really needed in the cannabis space, and I hadn't really seen it much beforehand. So the expertise, the formal education is now growing and spreading in the cannabis industry. So that's great to see. Okay, me being German, being a chemist, talking to business people is still a little difficult. There is a language barrier. Not so much the English-German part. It's more like the science to money side. But they are now also getting more into the understanding of what I want to tell them.
I think we've probably got time for about one more question here. So I'll leave it as a sort of general one for you to go on as you wish. But from your perspective, how do you want to see the industry change? You've talked a little bit about more typical chemists from other industries coming into roles that you might have liked to see. What else is there in the industry that you think would give it a little kick in the behind to get it out of the slump that it's been in since the heady days of 2018?
Sure. So thank you for giving me that opportunity so I can go on my own rant for now. So one of the founding mottos for my company is fundamental collaboration. And I've talked about fundamentals a lot already. But the other aspect is the collaboration aspect. So collaboration we do within our team. We have expertise from various backgrounds, various cultural backgrounds for different views on expertise. But we also have collaboration with academia. So right now I'm on a research project for a client, and I think right now we have 7 professors involved in that project because we need all these different angles of expertise. And my wish would be more collaboration within the industry. When I started in 2014, people were telling me, I can't tell you what I do for extraction because it's like my secret. And I looked at them and was like, your secret extraction is first year chemistry education and you're even doing it badly. Like, why do you want to keep that secret? So it got a little better there. I then from the beginning made the point of talking about my research, presenting my research to let everyone know what we are doing so that everyone can get inspired and take this on. And we are still a small industry. When people last year were really excited that the cannabis industry made $25 billion, and I think that was what, worldwide or just the US? I'm not sure, but they made $25 billion last year. And the ad revenue of YouTube was $25 billion. So I can't see how cannabis is a massive industry yet. So we still need to work together to get better. It doesn't really make sense fighting each other right now because the industry isn't yet over this hump that it will actually exist forever and be profitable. So therefore, I want more collaboration. And the collaboration is between industry producers and us as their help, because they are producers. Their focus is to make stuff. Their focus is not to research stuff. That's our focus. And I can't produce. Like, I'm really bad in filling vape cartridges. I tried when I was in my production job. There are way more skilled people for that. But then in this collaboration aspect, collaboration is difficult if the mindset isn't there, but also if the processes aren't there. We have a few clients we help, and we then try to understand what they're doing and utilize all their past processes and past runs to look at the past to optimize the future. But it turns out they maybe have noted a few numbers on a piece of paper handwritten somewhere stained with cannabis oil and filed it in non-consecutive order somewhere in a drawer. And then they give me these sheets. Like, how am I supposed to understand their process if they don't know it themselves? So one of the biggest hindrances for us right now to collaborate with producers to optimize their extraction is their own tracking. They don't note down what they're doing. They don't have a close tracking on all the different steps and aspects to it. And that makes life for themselves really hard and for myself. And we know that big data is like this buzzword. And if a cannabis producer has now done hundreds or thousands of extraction runs, they sit on a trove of data that has a lot of value, but they have never wrote it down. So they haven't created any value. So in our case, we have now collected thousands and thousands of extraction runs, and we can now look at the data and understand it. And we're using a lot of statistics and data science to deal with it. And I've burned out a lot of eager data science students on these projects. And there's a lot of data that is incomplete, that still needs a lot of work from us and a lot of massaging to really get any insight from. So my wish to the industry would be collaborate, talk to each other, help each other, and please track what you're doing. Like, if you want to be a real industry and you want to be GMP requires that you note down what you're doing. And people haven't done that. So that's my little rant and wish to the industry.
Well, collaboration is absolutely key, and I think we can all agree on that. Markus, you've been a great guest. Thank you so much for joining us on the Professionally Cannabis Podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Where do they go? The smoke rings I blow.
Well, I think it tells you all about the kind of man Markus is for the fact that he didn't take paracetamol after breaking his shoulder. An absolute trooper. When I came off my motorbike last year, I also didn't go for the pharmaceutical painkillers of codeine, but I at least did have some sweet cannabis edibles to reduce at least the concentration on it. Although, as Markus said, cannabis is probably not that useful for acute pain and is more useful in chronic pain situations, but sometimes some people prefer it for even the acute situations. Anyway, listeners, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more of pain management, cannabis's applicability, and guests being injured in future episodes. So if you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe, comment and share, and join us for another episode of Professionally Cannabis next time. Until then, goodbye.
Hello, please take me above, take me with you.